Okay, well, we're going to begin here. First of all, thank you to everybody who is currently listening and joining us tonight here for our SEL committee's latest here Parent University on the subject of gun safety. This is something we put on these presentations throughout the year in a number of on a number of subjects. This is one that really kind of came up and spoke to us as a district. We realized that gun safety is something that's so imperative, and it's something that we don't really talk about much. So we wanted to bring in our very special guest tonight here, Miss Aboykowitz, to kind of speak with us here about this. So she's going to present our slides. And if anybody has any questions throughout here, please put it in the chat line or in the chat box, and we'll get to those as we end. We'll end with some question and answer time as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. Like Brian said, Brandon, sorry. I am April. I live in Libertyville with my husband and my 3 kids, and I'm an attorney. I work downtown for an Illinois appellate court judge. And then in my free time, I like to volunteer for this organization called Be Smart. And so I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Be Smart is, sorry, I'm going to move this back here. Be Smart is an organization that was started by Every Town for Gun Safety Support Fund. And it's just an organization and a campaign that was started to bring together all adults really that are concerned about children, guns, and safety. So before we get going, I like to say, let's agree on these 3 things. Number 1, we all want our children to grow up happy and healthy. Number 2, we all have the right to protect ourselves and make responsible decisions about how to protect our homes, our families, and our communities. And that certainly includes whether or not to have a gun in the home. And number 3, if we can prevent even 1 child gun death or injury, it is certainly our responsibility as adults to do so. So we're not here today to talk about policies or changing laws or anything like that. It's simply to talk about safety. It is a heartbreaking fact that firearms are now the leading cause of death for children in the United States. And when we're talking about children in this presentation, we're talking about children under the age of 18. And when you break that down even further, you can see from this pie chart that homicides make up about half of those deaths, and a small fraction of homicides are school shootings. And then there's suicide, which is about 40% of child gun deaths. And then 10% are unintentional shootings, which is typically when a young person gets their hands on a loaded, unlocked gun and unintentionally shoots themselves or somebody else. So today, there are about 1/3 of all American homes that contain at least 1 gun, and 54% of gun owners report that they do not keep all of their guns locked. When we're talking about children that live in homes with guns, about 4.6 million children live in a home with a loaded, unlocked gun. And to put that in perspective, there are about 5 million children in the US with food allergies. So I always like to say, if you know somebody, a child with a food allergy, then you likely also know a child that lives in a home with a loaded, unlocked gun. So when we're talking about the consequences of unsecured guns, there's really 3 main consequences that we're going to talk about in this presentation. And I just pulled together a few headlines, pretty local, to show you what this looks like. To the left, you can see the unintentional gun deaths. Last month, there was a 2-year-old boy in Joliet that actually got a hold of a loaded, unlocked gun. That was in a bedroom of a home that he was at. The mother had said she just stepped outside briefly and came back in, and he had shot himself. He, as of last I checked yesterday, he was still at Lurie's. So another example in Bensonville, Illinois, this was a couple years ago, a 14-year-old boy unintentionally shot his 13-year-old friend. They were playing together at a friend's home, and that friend wanted to show them where his father kept his guns, which was in a bag under the bed. And a lot of times when we're talking about, loaded guns, there's a magazine and there's a chamber, and children don't always understand the difference between that. And it could look like the gun was unloaded when in fact there was a bullet still in the chamber. So that's what happened in this case. And then in the middle, school shootings. We all remember last year where a Michigan boy, a 15-year-old, brought a gun that his parents had recently purchased, and he brought it with him to school, shooting and killing 4 of his classmates and injuring many others. And then suicide deaths. In January of 2019, there was a young child in Lyons who died by firearm suicide at his home, and he was 11. And then just 3 months later, in April of 2019, a 13-year-old 7th grader brought a gun to school and shot himself in a bathroom at school. So all 3 of these scenarios are different, but they're all tragic, and most importantly, they're all preventable. So we're going to be talking today about what we can do as a community to prevent things like this. When we're talking about school shootings, this statistic to me is really appalling, because 76% of school shooters used guns taken from their home. So again, we're talking about people under the age of 18. And those shooters got their gun from their own home or the home of a friend or a relative. So secure storage is also going to help us prevent school shootings, and we're going to talk about how we keep a gun secure, what that looks like, and how to talk about it with other adults. And then this is just an example. A lot of times incidents of guns on school grounds don't make it to the news, or they do, and it's not really talked about, especially if there was no injury that happened. This just gives you an example over the course of the last 5 months of some recent incidents of a child bringing a gun to school. And remember that, a few of these months were summer. So it's just to show you that it's happening with alarmingly frequency these days, that children are bringing guns to school. So what can we do? That brings us to this whole program, Be Smart. SMART is an acronym, and it stands for Secure All Your Guns in Your Homes and Vehicles, Model Responsible Behavior, Ask About the Presence of Unsecured Guns in Other People's Homes, Recognizing the Role of Guns in Suicide, and telling other people about this program, and really just talking and normalizing talking about guns. So I'm going to go through each of these. The first one is secure your guns in your homes and vehicles. There are about 13 million households that have children that contain at least one gun. And one study found the majority of children in gun-owning households knew where the gun was stored. So hiding a gun is not storing a gun. The most secure way to store a gun is to secure it unloaded, locked, and separate from the ammunition. So unloaded, locked, and separate from the ammunition. That's the safest way to store a gun in a home, especially a home with children. There's a common misconception these days that, if the gun is primarily used for defense of a home, that will prevent easy access to a gun if you're storing it that way. However, in this day and age, and I'm going to show you here on the next slide, we've got a couple examples, but there's actually a lot of different gun safes out there now, including biometric safes that read your fingerprint, and those are very quick. They're on Amazon. You can go to a gun store to ask about these, and they're relatively inexpensive. A fellow volunteer of mine, we're just looking the other day, they're about $55. They can obviously be much more expensive, but they're very accessible. So if that's your primary use of your gun, there are certainly ways that you can still store it so that nobody else can gain access to that gun. No children, no neighbors, no friends, things like that. And also keeping guns stored and locked properly will also reduce community violence, because while you may have a gun that you use for a lawful purpose, if it is stolen because it's not secured properly and it's used for an unlawful purpose, then it contributes to community violence. There are 2 guns stolen in the United States every 15 minutes, and about half of those are stolen from cars. So if you can see all the way to the right here, there's like a console vehicle gun safe. So when you're riding in a car, you should also be properly storing your gun in a safe when you're in the car. There are also, I'm going to give you an example all the way to the right. You can see that there's like a simple cable lock, and those are given out at police stations for free. You can go to, I know the Vernon Hills Police Department does, I'm sure the Mundelein Police Department does, Libertyville does. You can just walk in and ask for a simple cable lock, and that's also, a good way to store your gun. So there's tons of options out there. And then before we move on to the next portion of this, I just did want to be make sure that everyone is aware of this, gun owners and non-gun owners, that here in Illinois, we do actually have a child access prevention law. So it's just basically says that if someone under the age of 14 gains access to a loaded, unsecured gun and harms themselves or somebody else, the gun owner can be held responsible. So not every state has that. And just something that I wanted everyone to be aware of, that here in Illinois, we do have that. Okay, so that brings us to the M, model responsible behavior. So a lot of times we put the onus or the responsibility on children. You know, if you see a gun, don't touch it. And that is absolutely the right thing to do in terms of talking to your kids about guns. However, I believe, and the Be Smart campaign really believes, that it should be our responsibility as adults to never put a child in that position. You know, it's always our responsibility to prevent unauthorized access, not a curious child's responsibility to avoid the gun. So I always say, you know, make it a part of your normal safety conversation. If you see a gun that's real or pretend, ask an adult before you can play with that gun. Now, I tell my children this, and I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, they will pick up a Nerf gun or a squirt gun that my nephews are playing with or my nieces are playing with, and they'll play with them without asking me. And it's not because I have irresponsible, bad kids. It's because they're kids. And so I always give you the example. My daughter, she actually has food allergies, and we talk about her food allergies every single day in my house because we eat all the time, and she goes to other people's homes. And she knows that before she can take food from somebody else, she has to ask me. And that was when we were, at least when she was a little bit younger. And so she's done it all the time. You know, she was very good at it. But a couple of years ago on Halloween, we had a couple neighbors over and everybody was around. And I saw, you know, this boy was going to he took a bite of like a Reese's peanut butter cup and didn't want it. And he was offering it to her, and she was definitely going to take it, but I was able to intervene. I happened to see it out of the corner of my eye. And again, she wasn't going to eat that because she's a bad kid or an irresponsible kid. It's because she's a kid and she got swept up in the moment. She was with her peers and she trusted him and she was having a good time and she forgot. And so I think it's just really important to remember that, yes, talk to your kids about guns, but make sure it's our responsibility to make sure that they're never in that position to begin with. More than a third of kids that live in gun owning households have reported actually handling the gun. So a lot of parents, you know, think that their kids don't know where their guns are kept, but most children do. So there was also a study that was done that children that had taken a week-long gun safety course were just as likely to handle and touch a gun that was, you know, unsecured than kids that had no safety training at all. Again, just to highlight the fact that we're talking about children and they just don't have the, you know, the responsibility that adults do. And so if you're thinking right now in this point of the presentation that, you know, you're a non-gun owner, so far you feel like maybe this doesn't apply to you because you don't need to know how to lock a gun, or, you know, you don't need to model responsible behavior around your own guns because you don't have them. That kind of brings us to the next part here, which is asking other people about unsecured guns in their homes. This is something that we tend to not do, despite the fact that guns are the leading cause of death for our children. We would have no problem, you know, asking about pets or food allergies, or, you know, if somebody came to pick up my daughter, my 3-year-old, without a car seat, you know, I would certainly be checking before they did that. We sort of have all these safety things that we naturally talk about, but none of us ask about guns. And so, you know, my goal and the goal of Be Smart is to encourage everybody to start asking this as part of just general safety questions that you ask. So I always say, before my children go to somebody else's house, I always say, you know, before my daughter comes over, I would like, do you have any pets? And if you have any guns, how are they stored? And I always pose it that way because if you say, do you have any guns? It implies that perhaps you wouldn't go to their house if they had guns, which is simply not the case. I have plenty of friends that are gun owners and they're responsible gun owners, and my children have a great time at their home. So it's, you know, a question that if the way you pose it, you're asking about their storage method, because now we know how a gun should properly be stored, and you know what answer you're looking for when you're asking about how they store a gun. You know, we had talked about in the previous slides that 4.6 million children live in a household with at least one loaded, unlocked gun. So We also have, text and email on our side to be able to put this in a text and an email if you're uncomfortable making it part of a face-to-face conversation. And this next slide can kind of show you, just some examples to kind of make it more of a habit and to give you some examples of how to do this. What I also like to do is when somebody comes to my house, I offer the information to them. So before somebody comes over, I would say something like, just so you know, we don't have any pets and we don't have any firearms. And usually gets a response from somebody else like, oh, I didn't think to ask that. I should ask that as well. Or just so you know, we also don't have any guns. Or just so you know, we do have guns, but we don't have any ammunition at our house. And our gun is kept, unloaded and locked. Great. So, kind of can prompt a conversation both ways. I also like to encourage everyone to do this before you go somewhere as a family, not just for a drop-off play date. Because a lot of times, if you're like my family, we go somewhere or people come over and, the adults are congregating in one area and the kids are kind of all over the house. And so a lot of unintentional shootings happen when adults are present in the home somewhere. So it's important to ask these questions. I know that Thanksgiving is coming up and, the holidays. So you have to think about, does your sisters and brothers, do your in-laws, do they have guns? And if so, how are they stored before you go somewhere with your family and with your children? And then also babysitting. If your kids are of babysitting age, before you send them to babysit, I would be asking this question so they're not found in a tricky situation. And when I have babysitters come to my house, I do the same. I offer the information about my home to them. So basically, by doing this, if we all committed to doing this, we could be normalizing this conversation, and it wouldn't be awkward. I always say, this is a question that both gun owners and non-gun owners should be asking each other, right? It's not just a non-gun owner asking other people, it's both, because especially if you're a responsible gun owner, I would think that would be, even more of an important question that you would be asking others. So it's going to take all of us. And I think the more we do it, and the more normal it becomes, then it'll start bringing about social change. If people don't want to, go to somebody's homes because they're an irresponsible gun owner, there will be consequences then, and that's how you bring about social change. And I would never go to someone's house today and light up a cigarette in their living room, because we know now the effects of secondhand smoke and the health risks. And it should just be like that, as well as we talk more and more about gun safety. It should not be okay to have an unsecured gun around when children are present. So that's the hope here. By a lot of times we can feel overwhelmed by what we personally can do about the gun epidemic, and really this is one thing we can all do, especially as parents and community members. So that brings us to the R, and the R is for recognizing the role of guns in suicide. So as you saw at that pie chart at the beginning, gun deaths for children, 40% of those gun deaths are suicide. Most people who attempt suicide do not die unless they use a gun. It's the highest fatality rate in terms of method than any other means of self-harm. And this contributes to the fact that 41% of child suicide involves a gun. And again, we're talking about children, 17 and under. So they're accessing these guns, for the most part, 80% are accessing these guns from their own home, or from the home of a friend or a relative. So I always say to keep asking. We had just talked in the previous slide about asking others about the presence of unsecured guns in their homes. And I always say that these questions should still be being asked when you have teens going to other people's homes because of this. Most people that attempt suicide do not reattempt suicide. So it's a common misconception that people think, well, they'll find a way. And it's just not true. And especially when we're talking about young people. Most people that have survived a suicide attempt, they report having contemplated suicide for only 10 to 20 minutes beforehand. And again, especially when we're talking about adolescents, they can be very impulsive. And so access to an unsecured gun can literally be a matter of life and death. So it's very important as your children get older to start thinking about storage methods, rethinking your storage methods if they're not, or even removing your gun entirely from the home temporarily, if you have teens, that kind of thing. A survey of high school students found that 20% of high school students had seriously considered attempting suicide within the last year. And one study showed that 41% of adolescents in gun-owning households reported having easy access to the guns in their homes. So secure storage is going to reduce these numbers. Households that locked both the ammunition and the firearms had a 78% lower risk of self-inflicted firearm injuries among children and teenagers. And so I'm going to leave this up just for a second, but if you or anyone you know is in crisis, there are several national resources that you guys can reach out to. And at the end of this presentation, I will have a slide up that also has my contact information, which I'm happy to give more resources to anybody, or you can use the Be Smart for Kids website as well for resources. Okay, so that brings us to the T, and that's just to spread this message. A lot of people say, this is going to be awkward because I've been to my neighbor's or my friend's house several times and I've never asked this question, but now you've seen this presentation. And so hopefully you can say, I know that I've been over to your house a million times, but I just attended this parent university and it got me thinking I should be asking this question. I know I've never asked before, but do you have any firearms? And if so, how are they stored? The only time that a question like this would be awkward is if the answer is one that you aren't okay with. And in that case, so either they say, no, we don't have any firearms at the house. That's not awkward. Or they say, yes, we have firearms, but they are, stored unloaded. They're locked. They're separate from the ammunition. That's not awkward. Or, they say something like, my husband has guns, but even I don't know where they are. Or my wife has guns, but even I don't know where they are. Something along those lines, which would not be comfortable. Then it's awkward because you aren't going to want to send your kids there or go there as a family. However, that moment of awkwardness is a gift because you are then not sending your child or your family into a place that could be potentially very dangerous. So I think that, if you look at it that way, that the outcome is always only going to be good. There's no reason not to be asking this question. And I think that, we can't change the world, but we specifically, each individual has the power to make a difference. And if we all collectively agree to hold ourselves responsible and hold ourselves accountable as adults in a community, it will make our movie theater safer and our schools safer and our communities in general safer if we're practicing safe storage, looking at all these statistics. And then also, if anybody has, any sort of company that would like to hear this message or anything like that, I do lunch and learns. I do, coffee talks for parents before preschool. Obviously, these parent universities, anything like that, we love to spread this message. So if you can think of anybody and just sort of think today, who can I contact about this starting today? Who are you going to see this weekend? Or, this upcoming holidays that you can ask about their storage methods, or who can you offer your information to about the way you store your guns or whether you own guns in your home. And here is my contact information. If anybody wants to take a picture of this or, write this down, I'm happy to answer any further questions. And there's also handouts on our website about how to talk to children about guns, resources for suicide. There's tons of different resources on the website that I can direct you to, or you can go to as well. Yeah, and that gives the website right here for you.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, April.
You're
welcome. A lot of
welcome.
great information. Holy cow. It's a lot to think about, and really, I think a lot of people avoid thinking about this because it's kind of an uncomfortable, comfortable subject for a lot of people. And it's just like you mentioned here, just normalizing this conversation, like, something as simple as, we ask about what's in food, because our kids, have certain allergies, or what kind of pets you have, because, my kids might break out and start itching, but but yeah, I mean, why not ask this? Because the ramifications of guns are so much more severe potentially than some of those other ones. So I think you bring up just an excellent point about just normalizing this conversation.
Mhm.
If anybody has any questions, I mean, feel free to chime in. So my question to you is that last one you had with the T is,
Mhm.
what do you do in the event that you're not okay with their answer? And let's say you're already there, you just visited the house.
Yeah.
What would be, I understand, I could probably figure out what your answer is going to be, but how can we make it so that it's not awkward,
Sure.
or
Yeah,
it's kind of
I
more laid
know.
back? I would assume putting it on myself and say, hey, I think about these things, and if as long as I know the answer, I'm good. But
Right.
can you give us kind of a non-awkward way of approaching that?
Sure, sure. And I can give you a couple different examples too. So that's typically why I try to do it before I go somewhere, just because of that. Like you said, if you're
Yeah,
already there,
yeah.
it's a little more awkward. Although if you are already there, there is a way to say, let's just supervise the kids then in this room, or let's play outside and just make sure that they don't leave, your site. If you're going to stay in the living room or stay in the basement, whatever it may be, that's a good way. Otherwise, when I ask beforehand, and if I get an answer that I'm uncomfortable with, then I usually say something along the lines of, let's just have the play date at my house because I don't trust my kids not to get into where they shouldn't be,
Mhm.
something like that. So I kind of just put it on my kids. Now, I'm not wanting them to, they're really curious and I don't want them to find something that they shouldn't. So let's have it at my house. If you're more comfortable with the person, my brother is an example. He had guns, but he had them in the garage, and he always kind of said, "Oh, they're in the garage. They're in the garage." Didn't really give me a straight answer, and so, but we wanted to go to his house often. So I said I purchased a gun safe on Amazon, and when we come over, can I put your guns in there while I'm at your house, just so I know that they're locked? And he was like, oh my God, I'm going to buy a safe tonight. I don't know why I haven't. I'm sorry. And so he did. He bought a safe and everything was great. And we've been to his house a billion times. So that was a solution that I had come up with to just offer to do it myself while we were visiting. So if it depends how close you are with the person. But I had usually when I give this presentation, depending on the audience, there's at least one person that has had an experience with an unsecured gun, that either there was an experience of somebody who was showing homes and it was in a drawer that somebody pulled out while they were showing homes, a realtor. There was an example of a friend of mine who went to visit her in-laws, and the kids went to the bedroom and they were like, oh my gosh, we usually, secure them once you get here or when we know you're coming, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
they were mortified that it didn't, and they were so happy that it didn't result in anything, but it certainly could have. So it's happening, I think, and it's not reported. It's not like these incidents are really reported unless it ends in tragedy. And even then, not always reported. So, it's happening. And with the amount of guns, there are more guns currently in the United States than people. So they're everywhere. So it's really important to be asking the question, even when you're going to someone's home or maybe especially if they don't have children in their home, they might not be thinking that before you come over. So it's a good reminder.
All right, absolutely here. And I'm not seeing any questions here, but
Okay.
if anybody does, I mean, feel free to chime in. But April, I just want to say thank you for spending some time with us here this evening. Thank you for the Be Smart foundation and just bringing awareness to this, because it is so important and it's just something that just we're not talking about enough. So I want to thank you and the organization's time today, and I hope to work with you again in the future. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you everyone for having me. I always welcome the opportunity to spread the message. So I appreciate it.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much here, guys, and all the people that attended, thank you for your time as well. And we will be in contact soon, okay? All right. All right, bye.